Vande Matram. A very good afternoon to our chairperson, Ma'am Anjali Jaipuria, esteemed guest for the day, Sir Uday Arya, beloved principal, Ma'am Promni Chopra, Vice Principal Academics, Ma'am Deepa Vahi, our academic consultant, Ma'am Shalini Sinha, respected teachers and students. I am delighted to welcome all of you as we explore the powerful concept of writing to learn and how learning through writing can profoundly impact our educational journey. Yesterday, our guest, Mr. Uday Arya, shared with us that crafting one's path to great education begins with a clear vision and goal in mind. It is essential to be proactive and take charge of our education. We should seek out mentors, teachers, and resources like the great books that can help us on our path. We should not be afraid to ask questions, explore new subjects, and challenge ourselves. We must remember, education is not just about grades. It is about acquiring a deeper understanding of the world around you. We have to embrace the power of curiosity. Writing has been long recognized as a fundamental tool for both expression and academic achievement. However, it is not just a means of communication. It is also a dynamic process that enhances our understanding and retention of knowledge. When we talk about writing to learn, we refer to the practice of using writing as a tool for deeper comprehension. It is more than just taking notes in class or completing assignments. It is a deeper transformative approach to education. Now, I request Sir Uday Arya on stage for his address. We welcome you, sir.
What type of learning do you see on the right-hand side? Neat, organized, messy? Messy. It's messy good? It's good. No problem with this? Anyone expecting to see something very nice and beautiful, very nicely organized? No? So I'm going to show you the story of who got me into this, actually introduced me into writing and taking writing seriously. This is a prof of mine at my first prof at Columbia. When I started doing my master's, he gave his assignment. This was the course page. The course page actually was in 2003, but I've just taken the one. It looks like this, and it has all this info. But everyone was shocked. There were like 16 of us in class, and everyone was shocked at the very beginning because he said, by the way, the first assignment is to get to know you, so I need you all to put together a web page by next week. And this was 2003, so I'm dating myself, right? So it's a really long time ago. But he said, I need a reasonably good web page about you because I don't know anything about you, and you're going to be with me for the next 4 months. So I want to understand your interest, your background, etc. So I don't have time to meet you all individually, etc. So just put together a web page. I'll read it when I can. So and by the way, most of us had no idea how to put together a web page, zero idea, right? So this was a fun requirement. Okay, any creative work, we said, okay. He said, just put together whatever. And what ended up happening was this. Okay, I spoke my heart out on my own web page. I put together my poems, some experiences I'd written about, experiences I'd not written about, some pictures of Ladakh, and it totally changed my worldview, actually, about writing, because it was so frustratingly hard. It opened me up to my own vulnerabilities and said, I don't perhaps understand myself as I thought I wasn't so clear about myself, and then I noticed that I was actually curious enough about everybody else's assignments as well. So obviously I learned something about learning mistakes, about learning to make websites. I made a whole bunch of technical mistakes while doing it. It was a huge confidence booster. I felt like I could create a website for pretty much anything, right? You've probably seen this video. I am smart, I am blessed, I can do anything. It's a cute viral video. And I think the starting point was that good self-awareness led to much higher self-awareness. And that kept building on itself. So why write? Here's something that this guy called Crazy Polymath, who's Kunal, writes on Twitter. When confused, write. We think with gaps, and those gaps become visible when you write. Writing also makes you think slowly. This is the very opposite of what conventional academic wisdom tells you. We need to think fast, think fast, think fast, think fast, think fast, think fast. Why can't you think faster? Why are you so slow? But all the great, massive progresses in humanity have not come from speed. They've come actually from thinking slowly. To think slowly is an art, and it's difficult because we are habituated to try and move fast to our conclusions. And the ones who really make massive progress tend to be slow. So thinking, in fact, one of the most popular books that some of you have probably come across, it's called Thinking Fast and Slow. Right? Daniel Kahneman, he won a Nobel Prize for it. He says, hence you are more rational while writing. This guy, David Perel, anybody heard of this guy, David Perel? Yes? Okay. David Perel is one of the best known writing advisors on the internet today. Lives somewhere in America. He sells actually a course on writing. Believe it or not, this course costs $4,000 for approximately 5 weeks. Okay, so $4,000 times 80, 3.2 lakhs-ish for a 5-week course when you don't get to actually meet him, by the way. This is an online course. You get to meet other people, but think about, and there's a waiting list for this. So you have to sign up well in advance. Why is writing so valuable? This guy discovered something very interesting. Why is writing so valuable? Writing well, by the way, not any random writing. Why is good writing so valuable? I've underlined no marginal cost for a reason. It's the power of the internet, right? And you've seen this in a way with YouTube Shorts or Insta Reels for sure. It's the power of ideas. Good ideas can have virality because they can spread at no marginal costs. In the old age, everything that needed to be disseminated involved costs, significant costs. You wanted to get a book out and print it and share it with 500 people, good luck finding a printer. Good luck finding a publisher. And then actually distributing it, like putting it on bookshelves. Right? Most stuff that gets printed stays in warehouses. It actually doesn't make it because no one's really willing to take it and put it in front of customers. So it's hard. Whereas on the internet, marginal costs go down to practically zero. Right? So good ideas, if they are indeed good ideas, can spread rapidly. He also says your work can spread around the globe while you sleep. So we talked about compounding earlier. So good ideas compound and work for you in case you're actually trying to do something constructive with it. And as a creator, if you actually have something new to say, something original to say, which by now you should have that self-confidence, and if you don't build it, that you do have something to say. Each one of you has something original and fresh and new to say. You might take a little time finding out what that is, but it's surely there. So he says, if you want to take the next logical step, you have to be able to communicate well what you're actually writing. We can also ask this question. So now there's AI, why would you need to learn how to write well? So the language of English has a grammar. It has a certain way of writing which makes it more appealing. That's why there are bestsellers and there are books that are never read, right? So why would you need to learn how to write if AI can do it for you? You can give, and there are multiple examples, you've probably seen them yourself. You take a large jumble of text and you can say, this, I know I've written it, this is pretty bad. Why don't you make it better? Why don't you make it substantially better? And the AI can understand, okay, these are the rules of grammar, of language, and this is what makes a good sentence versus an average sentence. In like a second, you'll have a way better draft of what you wrote. So you can make the argument, right? Why learn how to write? AI can do it. Google Bard can do it. Bing can do it. ChatGPT can do it when it's not too busy. So why learn how to write? In fact, there's Grammarly. Some of you have probably used Grammarly. Any mistakes on grammar? No problem. I don't need to learn the rules of grammar if Grammarly can fix it for me instantly. So why write? And why bother to try and even pursue this idea that writing well matters? Why? I'd make this argument for you, that learning to write is learning to think, very simply. And most people actually can't think well. Also a truism. You'll notice this. It's a sort of a normal distribution, but you have to ask yourself, where do you want to be on this normal distribution? Do you want to be an outlier, or do you want to be somewhere in the middle? Somewhere in the middle is not going to take you too far, but if you want to pursue something fantastic and you want to be a way better version of yourself, of course it means you will have to be an outlier, and being an outlier means putting in effort to learn how to write, in brackets, learning how to think well, right? So thinking well brings clarity, and that's actually what brings you to good writing. This is a really interesting book. It's called How to Take Smart Notes. Anyone heard of this book? No? It's a German author. He writes this: if we write, it is more likely that we understand what we read, remember what we learn, and that our thoughts make sense. So I'm going to ask you a simple question. What is the claim type in this quote? I've given this quote for you in front of you. What is the claim type, in the sense that, is it a weak claim or is it a strong claim? Why is it a strong claim, or why is it a weak claim? Anyone? Take a view and speak. Just raise your hand and we'll get a mic across to you. If it's a strong claim, why do you believe it's a strong claim? Look at the language that's there. If we write, it is more likely that we understand what we read, remember, etc. Is this a strong claim? Okay.
I believe it's a weak claim because firstly the use of the word if and also the word of the use likely. It does not state it as a fact but as an assumption.
Zoya, excellent. Thank you so much, Zoya. It's very important, very, very important to be able to look at all claims from anywhere and everywhere and pre-assess if you're actually willing to buy into it or not. There's no reason to buy into any of the stuff that I'm saying, right? So you have to ask yourself, is this, and if it is indeed a strong claim, how are you going to validate it, right? It's a logical question. Look at this next quote. Writing notes accompanies the main work, and done right, it helps with it. Writing is, without dispute, the best facilitator for thinking, reading, learning, understanding, and generating ideas we have. What type of claim is this? Strong claim. It's a pretty strong claim. Would you say it's a super strong claim? Yes? No? Cancel? What's your guess? Scale of 1 to 10, how strong do you think this? Who said 10?
Because the word best facilitator is used and best itself is in its superlative degree. Therefore, I say it is a 10 on 10 claim.
Okay. In fact, you're right. And to augment your argument, he also says without dispute. Right? So you're making a super strong claim without dispute. So now, well, I'm going to ask you this. How is it possible to validate this? So he's making a strong claim. I'm ready to buy into it, maybe. I'll say, yeah, maybe you're a good author. I don't know. How do you validate this sort of claim? Any guesses? Any ideas? You can throw out your ideas. Yes.
So I have a different narrative to it. I mean, the first slide that you had shown, it was making the reader think and ponder upon it.
Yeah.
And this is a direct statement, which is stating the facts. So I feel if it's stating the facts, it's selling it really nicely. But the best reader is the reader who makes the readers think.
Okay.
As in the first one.
Okay, I'm with you. I'm very much with you. But let's expand and build on that. How do we, if we are to actually go forward, we have an option to reject this entirely, right? We can say, I don't know. Or if you are willing to say, yes, I like what you're saying. Why would I say that? And under what context would I be able to say, yeah, I like what you're saying? In fact, I agree with what you're saying. This is going to help me make the pitch, right? I'm talking about writing to learn. So you can obviously guess that this is going to help make that pitch. but how will it actually be validated in some objective way by you? This is a priori being given to you that writing is without dispute the best facilitator for thinking, reading, learning. What questions might you ask from this to counter this claim? This is a super strong claim. What questions might you ask? Anyone? Just throw out any set of words that come naturally to you, spontaneously. Yes?
If it is the best facilitator, that is a strong claim. So in comparison to other methods, how is it the best? It doesn't justify.
That's great, thank you. So you can ask in contrast to what? That's right, you're saying it's the best in contrast to what? What's option B? Why do I not know what's option B? What else might, so now we're also looking at the whole picture. If you look at the whole picture, this is the text that we looked at. You can also ask, who is making this claim? Is it some random Uncle G in an apartment neighborhood? It's possible. You'll very likely reject. I don't know, whatever, say whatever you want. But if it's somebody else, you might say, oh, maybe you have something to say. How do I know if this person is worth reading or worth respecting in this context? I've just brought him in front of you as a quote. Who's this guy? Yes.
If we apply it in our lives and we find it worthwhile, then we can accept it, and that would be the best validation, I suppose.
Yes, excellent point. Thank you so much. Experience is the best validator, right? How long would experience take to get you there? A long while, presumably, right? And again, we will have to ask the question she just asked, which is, in contrast to what? It might work out well for us, but in contrast to what? What are we comparing? How do I know it's the best? He's making the claim it's the best. So if I really have to dig into this, I'll have to explore more of what he's saying and say, maybe in the rest of the book he said something or not said something. Is he making this claim just out of thin air? People do that, by the way, right? I'm sure people make claims all the time out of thin air. And nobody pushes back on the claims. And so they get untested. They make a claim, and some people who are generally subjectively happy to buy the claim say, yeah, I like you, I like your face, so I'm going to just agree with you. Or I have previously liked you and liked your arguments, and I'm going to agree with you. Or could be just the mood of the hour. I don't feel like contesting anything today. I feel like just saying yes to everything. Could be many such possibilities, right? But when you are looking at something which is going to potentially impact how you decide how to learn, you're going to be super watchful. I would imagine you would be sitting, not so much like this. You'll be sitting more like, I want to see what this guy is saying. I want to see if it's going to make any sense. If it's not, I'm going to reject. Why bother? So here is another quote from his book. He says, writing is not just what follows research, learning, or studying. It is the medium of all this work. Think about that for a second, okay? The idea of the medium. He's saying, and when you actually engage with material, think about this too, if this is applicable or not. Again, a question that can only be validated by your experience. Is your experience agreeing with this claim? Maybe the author is insightful. You can look him up. You can look him up and see what's your background. Why should I trust you? Why should I take you seriously? Sometimes you find some claims and they're just referenced with a square bracket and number 8, and then you say, oh, it's got a reference. You follow the reference and it's some random person at some university, and then you say, what is your credential? Why should I take you seriously for this? So maybe it's worth asking if this person is indeed a subject matter expert or not. Is he well qualified to make this type of claim? If he is, and if he satisfies your own potential discriminatory faculty on this and say, yes, I think you will have something worthwhile to say. For now, I will go with your assessment or claim. I will still, however, validate it on my own later or not. So just a brief intro on this cognitive psychology term. You've probably heard it before, but no harm rehashing it. It's the science of understanding how the mind works. Okay? And the way they do it is they conduct empirical research into how people actually think, remember, and perceive stuff. It's hard to do this research. It takes a while. It's not trivial. It takes a fair bit of effort. You have to be super honest in your conclusions, very, very careful in what you infer, and in short, you have to be a good scientist, right? And if we have to be looking at anything from this field with great caution, this is a question that I want to lead you to today, to start with. Like, what does the science of successful learning say? And I would make this argument that it matters to you. It matters to me as a learner, as a student. I'm trying to learn a fair bit on the side, so it matters to me a lot, and I would imagine it matters to you substantially because you have high stakes things coming up, in which context it does matter. So here's a book. It's called Make It Stick, and it's got 3 authors on it. These two, they've dedicated their careers to the study of learning and memory. Okay, so Rodiger and McDaniel. And they've collaborated for 10-ish years thinking about how do we translate the best and most relevant findings of cognitive science into educational science. Very important subject, which is that most often when research happens at labs and universities, it stays in the labs in those universities, right? Because they end up being published as research papers, which not even your spouses or your mother will read. Nobody will read these research papers. They get read at best by people in your very, very niche field, and then they're forgotten most of the time. Sometimes they get a little bit of relevance because some news article picks them up and it posts it, and then maybe it's shared on some WhatsApp type groups or some forums, and that's it. So knowledge advances in some fields, but it stays siloed because it doesn't actually make it to where it could be super helpful or relevant. So these guys collaborated to actually bring out the best of what cognitive science has discovered and put it into this book called Make It Stick. Interestingly, the third guy, Mr. Brown, is the storyteller. So he doesn't know almost anything about this field or the subject, but researchers, as you will also know and figure out at some point, researchers don't know how to tell stories. They're abysmal storytellers. They suck at it. They just absolutely, they don't even know the language through which they are communicating, so they just do a lot of blah, and they can't get the ideas across in a meaningful way. Interestingly, there is an institute in the United States. It's a very alt-type institute where they get the researchers from different departments to talk to each other. So for example, a biologist will talk to a nuclear physicist. And these are frontier scientists. And they get them to communicate for the cross-pollination of ideas. Another very important idea. Knowledge remains siloed even within fields. And that is also unfortunate because knowledge generally is a large, synthetic, comprehensive thing. It is not broken down by departments, right? So universities end up breaking things down into, which department are you in? So this institute actually cross-pollinates and makes the large assumption that if you are from a particular field and you are very good at what you do, there is no reason that you cannot explain it in layman terms to somebody else. Just because you're a PhD or a super PhD, you've done 10 years of postdoc, and you're a super accomplished person, does not take away from you the expectation that you should be able to communicate in very simple terms what it is you are doing to somebody who has no idea about your field. Why can't you communicate that? If you can't communicate that, they actually don't take you on board. They need you to be having that clarity to bring forth and cross-pollinate, because then knowledge advances at a very, very rapid clip. This guy, Peter Brown, he's the storyteller. And Jobs actually said this, and it's one of the most well-regarded quotes of his. The most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. And if you've ever seen Jobs' keynote speeches, you'll see why he is absolutely compelling, right? Every single time, because he's rehearsed every second of his pitch over and over again, and he's just creatively brilliant. He was creatively brilliant. Anyway, so here's a quote from this book, which is, "People generally are going about learning in the wrong ways. Empirical research into how we learn and remember shows that much of what we take for gospel about how to learn turns out to be largely wasted effort. He says that learning is an acquired skill, so it doesn't come by default. This is an interesting idea. Learning itself is a skill. We're not talking about content. It's not about like getting new stuff into your mind. The act of learning, the art of learning, that itself is something worth thinking about. And he says the most effective strategies are actually often counterintuitive. Here's one, rereading. So this is the first one that, in a sense, he dispels, which is when you go over material over and over again, it doesn't really take you very far. It can easily fool us into believing we understand a text. Rereading is especially dangerous because of the mere exposure effect. So there are 3 strikes against this idea of rereading, and think about this in your studying of lessons of different types. It is time consuming. Of course, when you have to go back to material and reread stuff, it takes effort and time, right? And then it actually does not result in durable memory. And he says this in the context of experiments that have actually been conducted. Now it's not in the realm of opinion anymore. This is what cognitive science says. So it does not result. So you can reread a text, it's not going to get you far. Okay, third one, he says, it can make you feel as if you know the material well. That's what he refers to as the mere exposure effect. Because when you start to reread, sometimes you even read a third time, you look at the content and say, I know this stuff, I've read it before. I've read it. And you read through and some of the words appear familiar to you and say, I know this stuff. That's what he's referring to as the mere exposure effect, and it's super dangerous for the competitive exam point of view because it's not going to take you far if you just end up rereading it. I'll come back to that in a different context, but I want to jump to this, which is, and it's another key idea that good reading is based on good note-taking. So let's say we're reading an article on adolescence, okay? This is from this book called Excellent Sheep. And here's a piece of text that I would like you to just spend 30 seconds on. So if this text is of interest to you because you're writing an article on adolescence, let's say, you might ask this question, okay, yeah, it was sort of thought-provoking, I don't know, I want to do something with this text and incorporate it in my write-up. What actually happens? What's the best thing that we would normally do with this text? It's written in front of you, you have like a half page in front of you of text. What might you do with the text?
We go through it and we take the part that is most essential for us and we quote it.
Yeah, that's right. As a first step, if you have the physical paper in front of you or a book in front of you, if you're allowed to comment on it, you might do something like this, right? Something like this. And make a highlight, and then you'll say, interesting, this is interesting. Okay, because sometimes, sentences strike you, so you will write that, and then you'll read this and you'll say, are you nuts? Or you'll say, oh my God, something in the comments. So you basically are engaging lightly with the material, right? And that's a good thing. It's generally a good thing. It's better than flipping the page. It's one step better than just saying, okay, the page done, next. He says, in this book actually makes this claim that this actually doesn't help a whole lot. They're just fleeting notes and do nothing to elaborate on the text. So he says you have to do something with them. So highlighting is one of the most often used tools. This is true in college, in graduate school. It's true like pretty much throughout one's education. And so much so that, down to my people I know in the 5th grade, they also use a highlighter. Anyone here uses a highlighter? A show of hands. Not saying highlighting is wrong, right? This is not making the claim that highlighting is incorrect. It's one of the approaches to working with material. But he's saying it doesn't stay for very long. So this is what I would ask you to recollect, if possible, or that it's a scene from a famous movie that you might recall. Anyone? Sound of Music. It's a long time ago. It's a goodbye scene. So they're actually saying goodbye to this idea. So it's a goodbye to an idea that highlighting actually helps a whole lot. Because from a study point of view, when you're actually studying something, it doesn't. So in contrast, he makes the point that elaboration will help substantially more. So this is, I will say this, and I will agree with you also that by and large, this is a very different topic from yesterday's topic, right? And it's relating to something very core and fundamental and practical, but it will take some stamina to get through it. So we're only on key idea 5. There are 9 key ideas, so bear with me for a little bit. He says elaboration is nothing more than really thinking about the meaning of what we read, how it could inform different questions and topics, and how it could be combined with other knowledge. An example. Here's one on our circulatory system. Right? It's a pumping system, carries the blood around our bodies. The veins and arteries are the pipes, and the heart is the pump. Okay. The very idea of using this type of systems analogy, or some words which are actually not in biology, right? The very fact that you've created some different type of vocab to link this idea to something that you already know is part of what elaboration does for you. And it takes effort to, whoever did this the first time, like my guess is most of you are actually already familiar with this from a long time, right? This is a basic idea. But think about the words that have been used in this idea. These words have been crafted by somebody who originally did make the effort to make this elaboration. And so in all types of learning, elaboration over and over again, these cognitive scientists actually point out that it actually helps you learn new material. And if you practice elaboration, there is actually no known limit to how much you learn. This is a breakthrough idea, actually, in stark contrast to the conventional sense that, your mind is limited. It can only hold so much. Beyond this, there's a thing that's mind is going to explode. I have too much random stuff in my head. Yes, if you feed yourself in a very inappropriate way content into your head, it's not going to last for sure. But the cognitive science actually says that if you take the trouble to elaborate on all kinds of learning material, anything that you are new to, if you take that trouble, the potential is actually limitless. There is no known limit. Cognitive science says we've never observed any upper limit. You can just keep learning new stuff, and keep learning new stuff in a way that actually stays with you. So you give material meaning by expressing it in your own words. Right? And that's the part which you have to sort of underline to yourself. Have I made the effort to express this new material in my own words? If not, am I relying on somebody else's description? Somebody else, and by the way, people make wonderful descriptions, right? And they have learned a lot. They're sharing their learning for you. Having made that wonderful description, you'll say, aha, kya baat hai? What a wonderful, beautiful way of saying it. Insight. It might not stay with you for very long. You will appreciate it, but then it will go away. It will leave you very soon, because the effort in learning is actually making that on your own. So you have to make an effort, however, I wouldn't say boring, but it's effortful. So you'll have to actually be conscious about that and say, I think this is interesting. It matters to me. Whatever that idea or topic or subject is, I'm going to make that effort to make it, to express it in my own words. Third, which is that the more you can explain about the way your new learning relates to your prior knowledge, the stronger your grasp of the new learning will be, and the more the connections that you create will help you remember it later. This is the idea of neurons interlinking in the mind. The more the connections, the better. So it takes a little bit of effort, but without it, you're back to your old self. So think about this. Prior to cognitive science, the good findings of cognitive science, we would be back to our old ideas of how learning actually can take place. If you want to learn something for the long run, you have to write it down. If you want to really understand something, you have to translate it in your own words. Again, a super strong claim, no doubt. But if we are to take him as a credible source, maybe it is worthwhile holding that idea in your mind and seeing, is it true for me or not? And of course, as he just pointed out, the only way to do it is to actually try it. Right? So translate it into your own words. So here's another thing about rephrasing. It's not always going to be the case that you will actually get it. Of course, nobody is perfect, and it's not humanly possible to understand every difficult idea at the first shot. So when you can't rephrase it, when you try and rephrase it in your own language, and it appears to you as a very crude, inferior, not good version of the original, that is normal. That is a normal part of learning new material. It's not going to work the first time. In many cases, that's true. So it's, in a way, up to you to make that second effort to say, I can do better. I will rephrase this another way. And of course, the mind gets more capable at producing a better result. It exposes gaps in our knowledge, basically, right? So that's an important idea. So, and the last line, super critical, because no one's there to watch you at this time. If you can't be honest with yourself on your own lack of understanding, you're done for. You're totally done for, because you're the easiest person to fool. We are the most easy people to fool. We fool ourselves all the time in various ways, self-deception. But this is a very important context where you're trying to learn something new. If you can't actually understand it, that is normal. It can take a little bit of effort to get there, but you have to be at least honest with yourself on that lack of understanding, and writing brings that clarity in front of you. If you make the effort to write, if you make that effort to paraphrase, rephrase, it will bring that clarity to you. And when you do get it, it's an obvious internal check mark to you. Of course I understand it. Why would I not understand this? I, in fact, just rephrase this for you, for myself. And when you have that clarity, you are able to, of course, share it with anybody and everybody. I've just rephrased it. What more do you want me to say? It's done. So that's an important point too, right? And just look at the stuff on the top right. So I'm calling these tiny comments. So they may be sort of like passing thoughts that you make when you engage with fresh material. But you need a little bit of effort to retain the ideas. And I'm calling it a permanent way. Let's just use the word permanent for now, as against fleeting. Fleeting is temporal, it goes away. So it shouldn't get wasted, right? So here is, so this blue stuff is pretend it's handwriting. I couldn't find a different font, so just pretend it's some sort of handwriting. Okay, so this is an effort to try and look at this text over here, instead of just walking away from the text and saying, this was interesting, and oh my God, and over. Here's an actual effort to write down something which hopefully captures some essence of that original. It may not be perfect, but it's a start, right? So I'm saying intellectual and emotional freedom requires young adolescents to be able to consciously and purposefully defy one's parents when necessary. Okay, by the way, I'm not ever suggesting you to defy your parents. This is just a quote from the text. This is just a contextual, you decide what you want to do. So this is an example of what might be a permanent note, right? And it's made either in the margin, at the bottom of the page, top of the page, but it's something that you consciously make an effort to do. And I do understand we work also in a digital world, so stuff has to make it from paper to digital. So here's an example of a Google Doc, which I called notes from this, right? That was the paper note. And here there is that version of that same note in a digital form, where I've added these 4-5 words in bold, which is saying it may be argued that, because now I'm actually making that subsequent effort to make it more retainable for future. So this stays by itself. Note, the article is long gone, or the book I've walked away from several years ago, but this is now a part of my note collection for good, because I can access it and I can say, oh, this is an interesting idea by itself. And because I have managed to, well, not with great skill, but I've managed to put it aside, reframe it as an idea that exists by itself, it has some meaning for me without the original context. I do not need that original context. I do not need to be reminded exactly, oh, wait a second, where did this come? I'm totally lost. If you're lost, you probably didn't make that effort well enough. So then you have to calibrate and think about what does it take to make permanent notes from all kinds of interesting topics and subjects that you come across. Like permanent is stuff that stays in your collection for good, which is building knowledge in your own way. So this is like the old diary idea. And many, by the way, it's in a sense, many good learners that I now think about, now that I know a little bit about this stuff, now that I observe the people who I respected back in the day, many people did stuff like this, maybe in a more paper format and less digital, but they learned well, now I understand, because they actually engaged a lot more with the material. And I didn't. For many years I didn't. So I obviously didn't understand it so well. Right? So it makes a difference. So here's another more explicit, this is not even a claim, this is actually advice. Make permanent notes. Okay, with 10 packs of cigarettes, somebody. Whenever you read something, make notes about the content. Write down what you don't want to forget or think you might use in your own thinking or writing. Keep it very short. No time for Ram Kahani type. Just try and be concise. Being concise and brief is actually also a skill. And of course, be very selective. Like when you look at a page that you have just passed through, every idea you have to sort of begin to abstract away into essence. What is essence? What is essential in this paragraph or this page or this 1.5 page? So that's the discrimination that's being used by you, and that just gets better over time once you just practice it. And then you come up with this idea of, I'm being selective, and I know this is not something that I really care about. Move on. So this is a process, right? It's a process, it's a way, it's a method to engage not just with books. Okay, yesterday we talked about great books. This is not just about books. We're in a new age. There are many other formats also. So of course, it's also about YouTube, not YouTube Shorts, because it's very difficult to make notes on YouTube Shorts. Okay, but there's also podcasts, and there's, of course, books. You had a question? No. So this was the 6th key idea. And I'm just building on this idea of making permanent notes. It has to be done in a permanently understandable way. These notes, if they have to have any meaning for you, they have to be done in a permanently understandable way. So it's that effort which you have to make that, they're not just reminders of thoughts or ideas in their original form. They actually contain the whole thought. And finally, of course, we've said this, but I'm repeating it again. So that's the idea on permanent notes. So think about that and what platform you might use. Can you do everything digitally? And this is a question that's bothered me a lot because I love working with digital content a lot. So I asked this question. What studies indicate that writing by hand actually facilitates understanding. You might actually already be familiar with this, but so this study was done that the people who took lecture notes, the students who took lecture notes by hand did substantially better than if they did it through their laptops. The number of facts were not very different, but the students who took via hand were much better. And interestingly, after a week, the difference in understanding was also there. So the point is, cognitive science is telling you all this stuff. So when you decide at a later point to actually use when you decide to use the laptop or a computer to fix these, to actually write down notes, maybe think again about the value of connecting your pen to the paper, because the science suggests that it matters how you actually work or engage with content. This is true for podcasts too. So when I'm listening to a good podcast, there are AI tools now, plenty of AI tools and apps which say, you don't have time for an hour and a half, that's okay, I'll summarize it for you. They'll actually listen to the whole thing and they'll give you you choose the number of words summary and they'll give you the summary. Of course, that's not going to be the same thing as the original, and you didn't make any effort to do it. The AI learned, right? So the AI gets better over time, you don't. But the whole point is that you are trying to learn something. So the shortcut is relevant if you're Let's say you're a business exec trying to wing a meeting. Wing, I'm saying wing in the most generous sense, that you haven't really done your work, you don't have any time for whatever reason, time allocation went sixer, and you want to get that long something summarized. Yeah, you can use AI, there's plenty of AI, but your learning didn't really happen. And if you want to actually learn that something new, you will have to sit down and make the effort for it. It's worth it. Here is another large piece of text. It's a Xerox. Sometimes you work with Xerox. Like I've worked a lot with photocopies and margin notes. So where do you take the stuff online? There are actually many different and interesting note-taking platforms for this digital age that we are living through, right? This new knowledge society that we're all a part of. So Google Docs is banal, but still a good starting point. There's also Evernote. There's also Notion. And if you've used Notion here before, okay, raise it a little bit higher. Okay, super, good. So there's Notion, and then there's other tools like Obsidian and Remnote, which are taking this idea of note-taking well into the future. And they have actually, Remnote in particular has taken the best advances of cognitive science and made them available for students at large. And by the way, it's free. So think about it. So when you do your note-taking, it's a way better option than Google Docs. It's Remnote. So it might be of use. So yesterday, we did this, we asked this question, right, about what happens before we actually begin a book. And we asked a whole bunch of questions. What might be the key idea of the book? What's the map of the book? And which parts are you most interested in reading? So it's sort of pre-reading. It's the idea of pre-reading and why pre-reading is valuable. Today, I'm taking that idea a little further. I'm saying when you are reading a portion of a book or an article, ask yourself questions. And that's the key idea here, which is generate questions for yourself. Importantly, without looking back at the text, right? Again, insight from cognitive science. If you have to really learn, you can't look back at the text. So this is you working in all honesty with yourself. So you're actually trying to create questions for yourself, such as what? What are the key ideas in that portion of the book or article? And what words or terms or ideas were new to me? Again, only if you're honest with yourself, you'll say, this was new to me, this was vaguely familiar to me, this I've heard about before, but he used it in a different context. Only you will have that complete transparency with yourself, which is why it's valuable to ask these questions while you're actually working with that text. What's new to me? And remember yesterday I talked about the idea of contrast, right? So when you're looking at a book and you say, this is what I think the book is about, and when you finish the book or do most of the book, or you get a much better idea of what that book was actually about, that contrast helps you a lot. So this is the similar idea about contrast. Whoa, this is a tricky one. Is it possible for me to define some of these terms? When it matters, it's not going to matter all the time. In some cases, it will matter. Definitions are not just for exams. Okay? Being able to define something is not just damn competitive tests, or I can't be done enough or sooner enough with these very painful systems that keep testing me. Well, think about it from a learning point of view also. Being able to define something is actually a good reflection of your learning. If you can't define it, again, this is the idea of that scientist who can't explain his work. If a scientist cannot explain his work or her work, that's really unfortunate. How can you not explain your work? Just because you have all these degrees doesn't mean your mother is now, father is, I'm so well studied, my parents though, inke to, why can't, and you can't use language as a defense also. I'm so good with English, they barely understand English. Why can't you explain it in the language that is familiar to them? That is also a part of good communication, right? So this is a question that you ask again, can I not define it? Why can't I define it? If you can't define it, then you've probably not understood it. So, and then, of course, how do the ideas relate to what I already know? This is the idea of building more neural connections. subconsciously, or the idea is you're not really thinking, from a cognitive science point of view, but I'm just giving you that backdrop. If you think about how the learning, any new material links to stuff that you know, it expands your circle of competence, for sure. It builds on your mental models. You have much larger frames to think about the world. And it's not going to be apparent to most people most of the time. It's actually a very private thing. Your understanding and the complexities and layers of your understanding is actually a very private thing. It just keeps building over time, right? But it takes effort. So you have to ask these questions. So that's why this slide is actually saying generate questions for yourself, separate from the questions that others might ask of you. You have to be asking questions of yourself. And then writing down your own answers to these is also a great way to study. Again, preferably by hand, not so much the keyboard. So that was the seventh. So here's a sample essay, and I've just put a bunch of random text in Spanish. Hopefully most of you don't know Spanish. And then on the right-hand side, here's the idea, right? For each of the paragraphs, don't just read and move on, right? Engage. How do you engage with the writing? Well, you're going to be asking for each of the paragraphs, if this essay matters to you, what is the key idea? And then going further, can you convert your version of the key idea into a question? Did you have a question? Sorry. Can you do this? It's not so hard. Can you try to relate this para to something you already know? And finally, can you spend a minute or two looking for examples outside of this article? So this is that even more purposeful, okay, you know what, I'm struggling to find examples. I tried, I can't really find examples. It will happen, of course it will happen. But the idea, in fact, you have to remember this, that no effort is truly wasted. When you're trying to learn, if you're being conscientious about it, no effort is truly wasted. That very act of you trying to relate it, trying to find examples, will work subconsciously for you, and at some point the click happens. You'll say, oh, now I know, here's a good example. Here's in fact another example too. And these types of small efforts actually have very, very large consequences for your overall learning. So generate questions for yourself. And this is a question that affects all of us. When my mother tells me, she's 73, that, beta, I'm beginning to forget a lot of stuff, I said, I know, I'm with you. We all forget stuff, right? It's natural. To forget is to be human, right? This is what happens. 70%, ouch. And then the last 30% also goes, oops. It just goes more slowly. Cognitive science says so we have to work with it. So if we have to be learning new material better, of course, this is a question that we have to ask. Can we get better at not forgetting? Is there a way to not? And this is not a mnemonics trick. There's no magic memory tricks type thing on this. But it's a central challenge, right? And how do you find a way to interrupt the process of forgetting? The author has used this word, interrupt, in that blue book, Make It Stick. How do you interrupt the process of forgetting? And what does cognitive science say about this? This is an interesting point, and it was quite a fresh one. Testing and quizzing are actually very powerful learning tools. And the striking research finding is this, of testing to actually strengthen memory. So in contrast to what is conventionally known, right? I'll come to that, but he says the more effortful the retrieval, the stronger the benefit. Okay, this is what we know, right? Testing is typically done to measure learning. How much is the key question? How much have you learned? How much do you know? Is what testing is typically used for. And it's a way to calibrate. Yes, no, 6 out of 10, 9 out of 10, 2 out of 10. Testing typically tells you that. And then you either feel miserable at the end of this, or you feel fantastic and jubilant. But the authors make a different point altogether, which is that testing is a superlatively good learning tool. And what they make the point is that regular self-quizzing for students, and we're all students, right, of different ages, we're all students. So regular self-quizzing will actually be super helpful to check what you do know versus what you don't know. So if you think about this word question banks, term question banks, what word or words come up to your mind? You've heard this term, I'm sure, before. I'm positive you've heard this term, question banks. What terms come to you, to your mind? Where, in what context have you heard this term, question banks? Okay, let me invert this. How many of you have not heard this term, question banks? Raise your hand. Okay, that means the rest of you have heard. So what is this context of this word, question banks? Where have you heard this?
So usually question banks relate to a singular topic, like a collection of questions to a singular topic.
Correct. I just want to build on that. Keep the mic. But where have you heard of this term? Like, where have you? Like, do you have question banks at Jaipuria school?
Yes, sir.
Where else have you heard of this concept or this term of question banks?
Like.
It's a very popular context, and once you hear it, you can you will say, of course, wow, of course. Why are you boring me with this? Okay, it's coaching centers.
Yeah.
Right? Coaching industry knows this, and for the longest time, the coaching industry was having a monopoly on this idea in this context. They knew that if you were to use these sets of question banks for learning, it will be super helpful, which is that you over and over again, you give the student an opportunity to actually learn through testing. This is very different from learning or rather testing just to see how much you know or you don't know. It's actually learning through testing, because now we know this idea that testing is actually super, super helpful. So all around the world, it's not just in India, it's not just Quota Factory, all around the world, this idea of these question banks relate to this idea of self-quizzing. So these coaching institutes actually only do one thing really well, which is they prepare a whole bunch of quizzes and they bring that to you over and over again, which schools typically do not do, which is why in many contexts the coaching centers have better technical results than schools, because schools don't focus on this, but the coaching centers are shamelessly focused just on one thing alone. So if you have to be focused on that, you do that over and over again. In fact, they also take into account one more, even more advanced idea of how students learn, which is this, that repeated recall is important. Right? So this is the final idea for today, which is that repeated recall is important and you have to space it out. Okay, what does that mean? So they're actually saying in this that this should actually be a primary study methodology or strategy, which is you just repeat this very simple idea that you recall from memory something that matters to you again and again, if it matters to you. Because remember the thing about forgetting, it goes from 70 to 100. So 70 first and then 30 and then it's out. Right? So if it matters, you have to engage with it over and over again. So if you set aside a little time every week to quiz yourself on some sort of material that matters to you, that'll help a lot, right? It's not just stuff done this week. So if you're actually building a quiz on your own, it's not just stuff that you learned this week at school or wherever else. And this is also applicable, of course, after you get out. But it's also the stuff that you'd learned the prior week, right, or 2 weeks before. And you keep going and seeing, what did I learn over the last few months? And you make an effort to ask yourself and build a quiz for yourself on this. So you're actually doing it either by hand, or you're making a Google Docs version of it, which is very simple, or you're building a Google form, which allows you to build a quiz. It's not rocket science, right? These technology tools are out there. If you don't know how to do it, you can Google them. But you're creating a quiz for yourself. And the science says that to be most effective, it has to be repeated, and it has to be spaced out like what we just talked about, but it also interleaving of subjects. So for example, in this context, if you're studying, let's say, chemistry or biology, you would actually interleave. When you're setting aside time to study and re-engage with the material, you will interleave your study of one subject with another and with another. And so the mind is actually hopping across. And you might say, it is too much strain on the mind. I cannot do this. Of course it's possible. It's this whole idea. In fact, the book makes this claim that learning is effortful. Good learning is actually very effortful. And it's not, you should not feel like, oh, just because I've never done this before and just because it's uncomfortable the first time you do it, it does not actually invalidate the idea. So these ideas, these learnings come from what we know today. It's best to make use of them. And after you engage with a new material, this is just an example, you quiz like a day after, a few days after, a week after, 3 weeks after. So this part was going back in time. You're quizzing yourself on material that you encountered before. And here, we're talking about the actual schedule of quizzing. Today you learn something new, ask yourself, come back to this a week later, 3 weeks later, 2 months later. And once you do make that effort, the retention is through the roof. It's not rocket science, it's cognitive science. Right? You've actually built these mental models into your mind as to how learning works. And importantly, they say you need to give yourself time to forget between these tests or quizzes. Well, you have to give yourself time to forget. I need time to forget. And your parents will be aghast to hear this. What do you mean you need time to forget? Why it is you are forgetting? But if you do it, if you actually give this time, this extra time, it's helpful. Because forgetting is also part of learning, right? Sleeping over, missing out on material that is potentially fresh to you, missing out and not actually getting it is part of that learning process. So that's the final idea, that quizzing actually arrests forgetting. And it relates to all the previous ideas that we were engaging with. If you actually restudy something after failing to actually recall it, they say you actually learn it better than if you're not trying to recall it at all, which is good. So failing to recall it is actually not a bad thing at all. It's good that you've made the effort and didn't get it. It's fine that you didn't get it, but it's better because that effort again counts in the learning process. Of course, this is why I put this in front and center in the slide. Anything you want to remember must be periodically recalled from memory. It has to really stay with you. Periodic practice is essential for hanging on to the knowledge you want to gain. And you make longer form questions. Okay, so the science says that, again, this relates to when you ask yourself questions through multiple choice or let's say true or false, the effort required in that learning is actually minimal. And it's not so much learning as that actually gets closer to being a test. And it's not so much about learning, right? Which is, again, an insight from the science that says the way you probe your memory matters. Meaning what? This type of stuff is less effortful than that type, which is having to write short answers. Whenever you actually have to write short answers to explain what you were quizzed on, it is significantly more impactful and better for your learning than just being, this is C, done, smile. It doesn't take you very far. It takes you for that particular moment, and you can move on from that moment with illusory self-confidence. But if you have to actually, if you leave a fill in the blank, for example, right, and fill in the blank with not just one word, but like 5 words, and then you have to actually write, that makes a big difference. Why is this true? Well, it's an active engagement. This you probably already have an idea for. So that's it. That's the point. We got across all these key ideas. Happy to share the deck across with you, or if you want to take a picture or whatever. Okay, questions? Yes.
one of your key ideas said that rereading doesn't work. I have experienced that if I read reread something like in my book, any book, it could be like fictional or it could be also studies, it makes my concept clear. So it makes me way easier to learn something. So what are your thoughts about that? Like, I don't think so that rereading doesn't work.
Good, I'm happy. You should. Experience is the ultimate validator, right? So if something has worked well for you, well and good. This argument from the book and what this cognitive science says is, rereading is substantially lesser effective compared to all the other stuff that was just mentioned. So it's not invalidating it as, this is a way better study strategy.
Yeah.
Again, you will have to evaluate that claim on your own. Is it true or not for you?
Right.
So this
Yeah.
is,
Okay, thank you.
Sir, you said that we need to give ourselves time to forget the material which we have learned. But sir, different material do not stay in the framework of our mind for an equal amount of time. For example, we would remember the lyrics to a song longer than we would remember a formula of physics. So how are we to efficiently figure out when we are to quiz ourselves after we have learned a material?
okay, thanks. So you actually just helped make her point also, that if you listen to, you probably didn't remember the lyrics to the song the first time you heard it. You probably heard it 9 times, right? And then you heard the song 9 times, and of course you're going to remember the lyrics. Typically when you're studying, you don't have the luxury of spending 9 times that effort to go through that material. But the song is 4 minutes, and it's fun and it's catchy. So that's different. But on the learning schedules or the quizzing schedules, you'll have to figure out something that works for you. There's no one right answer. So for example, I mentioned 1 week after and 3 weeks after. There is no golden rule about those numbers. You have to see what works for you, but the key idea is you establish a schedule for yourself across subjects or across topics that are of interest to you. And if you stick with that, the science says it's going to be substantially more helpful for retention.
Is a lot of time-taking exercise.
Yeah.
But you also offered writing and translating as an alternative method. But comparing these two, don't you think that writing and translating would also take exponentially longer to do?
No, great question. So the problem with rereading is that in comparison with the return which it offers to you, so it's the ROI idea, it's very less. So yes, it is also true that doing all this other stuff will take more effort. It will take more effort than rereading. But that's a question for you to decide on, is that worth it for me or not? Are you seeing it as being substantially more relevant to you and helpful to you and for your learning? If yes, then maybe that extra effort that a new approach requires will become worthwhile, because the results should speak for themselves.
Sir, we realize that when we are quizzing ourselves, we more often than not, if we do not get a question regarding a particular concept, our brain tells us to go back and read the whole chapter again. So this, as you had mentioned, that rereading gives a fatigue, and thus we develop a fatigue and close our books and stop studying rather than going to the quiz back. So how can we train our mind to not tell us to read the whole chapter and make us feel afraid, rather than read that concept and continue for the later part of the quiz?
It's quite straightforward. You have to decide on it. You just have to decide to not reread the chapter. Rereading the chapter is massively effortful, right? So just don't do it. Quiz yourself again, and if you have understood the idea, you should be able to explain it. Again, articulate through writing. That's why this is writing to learn. So make that effort to write, and then you should not need to go back and reread the chapter.
So one of the ways that I actually follow is that, as you said, I always take notes.
Yeah.
Right? And after this, I'm going to go home and convert this whole thing into a PowerPoint presentation, in which every slide would be on an important point that I learned and how did I understand.
Awesome.
So next time if I have to do something, I just open the PowerPoint. It just flows one idea after the other, the way I had understood it, the example that I had, the idea that it generated in my mind.
Yeah.
So it just gets solidified into one particular area.
Nice.
So
that's very good. It's very helpful. So the main insight or the main takeaway from what Shalini ji just mentioned is that she has a process. She has a process that works for her and she sticks to it, and for whatever reason, you'll have to find your own way of working, and that's what will help that compounding of knowledge for you. So there's no magic way, but I don't have time to share it, but I just wanted to give an example of a particular book that I had read. For that book, I put together, let's say when I was reading it, I made, 200, 300 highlights in that book. Let's say it's a 300-page book, and 300 highlights of, maybe 2 lines, 3 lines each. So I work with that and actually create a summary of, let's say, 10 key ideas from this book. And it's hard to do it. Right? It makes you work closer with the content, makes you engage with the content. And then not just are you doing that high-level summary of 10 key points from the book, you're also trying to get what is the key point of the whole book. And that takes even more effort. Oh my God, you have to go through those 10 points, each of which was meaningful to you in their own way. And you have to ask yourself, okay, what is the main point of the book? And so I try to do that, and that also helps build learning. That's part of my process. You will have your own process. Yes? Okay, good. Thank you so much.